Our discussants for today have been carefully selected, because this is a timely discussion. And so we had to look through to see who has, the pertinent experience to lead the conversation for today. Our first discussant, who will be taking us on governance structure in startups, is Mr. Idris Bello. Mr. Idris Bello is the founding partner of Lofty Inc. Capital Management, and he's also a mentor at Google for Startups Accelerator. He's also an angel investor and advisor to several startups, including Andela, Flutterwave, Andium. So Mr. Bello has quite the experience, not just the head knowledge, but has hands-on experience with working with startups. So he knows where the gaps are. He knows, what startups need to implement in their organizations to drive sustainability. Our second discussant is Ms. Yemi Keri, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Hercabella Limited, a technology business transformation company. She is also a director of the Lagos Angel Network and serves on the board of Africa Business Angel Network. She is a mentor to various digitally and technology-enabled startups. So Ms. Yemi Keri also has quite the wealth of experience handling startups in terms of advisory, and even sitting on boards and providing her wealth of knowledge and experience to these startups. So we believe that, this roundtable will be quite the experience for you. And finally, but not least, we have our moderator, Mrs. Folake Etomi, who is the Lagos State Coordinator of Nigeria Women in Information Technology. She is an experienced and innovative information technology and management professional with over 20 years experience, and she'll be leading further discussions around the topic of today. So please feel free to relax and enjoy this roundtable that we have put together for you. So right about now, we will have our first discussant, Mr. Idris Bello, who will be taking us on the governance structure in startups. So Mr. Idris, if you are ready for us, we are ready for you.
Sure, thank you. Yeah. So good morning, everyone. My name is Idris Bello, like I said, and over the course of the last decade, I have had the privilege to invest in almost 200 startups. And again, so what I share today is a view from being hands-on working with startups. And this topic is particularly germane at this point because what happens is that when you meet a founder today, right, who's starting the startup, right, by nature, because what they're doing is trying to move from an idea to a real business. When you introduce the topic of governance, it's not something that's really foremost to their thinking, right? They're thinking about raising money, they're thinking of ideating, they're thinking of all of those little pieces. And so unless something goes wrong or they go really big, a lot of people don't look at governance. So it's usually an afterthought to most founders. And so what I'm trying to do with this brief introduction today, brief talk today, is to ensure that as founders building startups, we actually incorporate the appropriate level of governance into startups from day zero, not even day one, right? Define what's appropriate and saying why is it important for us to even consider governance as founders in startups, and what do we do when? Right. So next slide. So when you look at the nature of the life of a startup, right, and you are saying, why is it important as a founder to even consider governance? I'll start with this quote by the Brazilian Institute of Corporate Governance, which says corporate governance contributes to leveraging value for the company, which is essentially what we're trying to do as founders of startups, creating value, helping it to go further, faster, and with less risk. It also helps pave the way for startups to fundraise, which often influences the speed and consistency of their growth. And this is a very key point to start from, because a lot of times as founders of startups, we're always thinking of fundraising. And what we sometimes fail to realize that fundraising is actually tied a lot of times to governance, because a lot of the funds, so a lot of the funds which actually end up investing in startups are guided by ESG, right? Focus on environment, society and sustainability and governance, right? And so a key factor for us as funders investing in startups is actually governance, and that's quite something that's quite important to know. And so you have to be able to find the link between governance and the funds you raise and the value that you create. So now let's look at Nigeria, right? So as a founder, as a startup founder in Nigeria, right, what are the rules that guide you? When we talk about corporate governance in Nigeria, you're talking about the statutory framework that's been created, and then the subsidiary legislation that then guides the individual startups. So overall, at the very top there, you have CAMA, right, which is administered by the CAC, right, which guides every registered company in Nigeria. And then depending on the specific sector that you are in, for instance, fintech, right, then you're then guided by the ISC, right, which established the SEC as its authority to guide that. You have the FRCN, right? But then you also have, if you're in the banking industry, you have both fee and all of the other laws that then guide what you do. And as a Nigerian startup, once you are registered with the CAC, then you are under these rules. A lot of times, founders don't think of them because nobody bothers them because they're very small. But it's quite important that you think of this from the very beginning. Now, when we now look at the definition of corporate governance, right, as a system by which companies are managed, monitored, and encouraged, and looking at the interaction between shareholders, board of directors, management, and other stakeholders. When most founders look at this definition, they're thinking, well, that's for the big companies, for Cadbury, for P&Gs, for Coca-Cola. So they never think of it as being for them as founders. But what you do realize is that even from day one, right, when you're starting a company, they're already stakeholders, whether it's funders, whether it's even your co-founders, whether it's partners. And it's quite important that from this day one, right, that a relationship has to be defined by governance documents, by governance rules. And a quick way to look at it is looking at the US. When we look at the founders, we look at startups in Nigeria, a lot of it is copied or fashioned after Silicon Valley. And in 2016, the SEC chair then said, when they were talking about governance and as applies to startups, she said, some of the principles that characterize public companies' transparency with investors, right? Controls on financial reporting, strong corporate governance. They also have applicability and relevance to private companies, especially those pre-IPO companies that aspire to go public, and should not be overlooked or avoided, whether or not mandated by federal law or an SEC regulation. So which means beyond even the standing rules, CAMA and SEC rules, there are some fundamental principles that would apply to you as a big company anyway, as a public company anyway. And it's quite important as founders, as startups, that from the very beginning, that we actually start looking at those and embedding them in the creation of those startups. And this is even more important with the stories you've had over the past couple of years, whether on the continent or even beyond the continent, around how very big companies, very big startups have failed, not because they didn't bring innovation to the market, not because they didn't have customers, but because they failed on governance. And so when you realize as a founder that investors are actually attracted by the fundamental principles of transparency, checks and balances, guiding your decision making, right? You then realize why it's important even to your bottom line and your ability to fundraise, to actually pay attention to governance. So I'd love to see, for instance, we're guided by ESG, right? So environmental, social, and governance checks. And so when we're investing, we're looking for what governance principles do you have in play? And then how do we ourselves then embed governance into this? To make this more practical, I think a lot of us might have heard of a company called WeWork, very prominent globally, right? Which revolutionized the idea of co-working spaces globally. WeWork failed in the last year or two, not because there wasn't a need for their product that they're offering, but it was due to issues around poor governance, issues around financial management, fake or exaggerated market projections, things around workplace culture, and those things, as big as WeWork was, it was a unicorn, but those fundamental principles that have been violated around governance caused the issues that then affected the company. And when those things happen, they not only affect the founders, they then affect the employers, the customers, the suppliers, the lenders, and even the economists around them. And so when you find companies like startups failing, even the woman who sells food in the area where that startup is situated is affected. And so it's quite important that we actually then consider, as startups, how do you adopt corporate governance from day one, right? How do you go to the point of saying, okay, even though I'm still in an idea stage, what's important to me? And the thing to understand is this: when there are startups and their life cycle, they usually go across 4 stages. You're a founder coming up with an idea, trying to turn into a business. You're in an ideation stage. Then you move to validating that idea, getting your first contact with the market, right? And then you then are testing that product against the market to ensure you have PMF, product market fit. Is it something the market wants? In what quantity? Does it bring money? And hopefully, after you have finished it and raised sufficient capital, then you just zoom off in the growth stage. And what I'm trying to say today is, at each stage here, there are levels, there are aspects of governance that apply. It is important not to get overwhelmed, right, by governance and all the structures and all the templates you see. I think what is quite important is to say, for what stage I am, what is the appropriate level of our governance? And that's what we want to look at next. So we're looking at the ideation stage. This is what's known as the hypothesis stage. You are between developing an idea, your understanding of the problem, and then proposing it to the market to solve, right? You are conceiving the idea, you are finding partners to work with, you're finding co-founders, and people to convince to work with you at this point. Sometimes at this point, you might not even have registered with CSC. You might not have a formalized existence yet. But at least between you and your co-founders, mostly, or your co-workers, there's some level of agreement or understanding that we want to work on this, right? And so the question is, at this point in time, should you be thinking at all of governance, or should you just be focused on the problem you are solving? So my answer to you is you always have to be thinking of governance. So at this point in time, you should start thinking about what are the roles and the responsibilities of the partners, of the co-founders. What sort of contribution? Are they contributing sweat equity? Are they contributing capital, right? How much time are they contributing to this? And then how are they compensated? Salaries, equity, other stakes. Who gets what part of equity? How do we divvy up the 100% equity? If someone leaves within the first 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, what happens to their equity, right? What happens to intellectual property in this stage, right? And how do we align all of the interests, right? How do we make decisions at this point? How do we make consensus when we disagree? How do we make progress at this point, right? And you might think these are just basic things that everyone should understand, but I've actually seen companies die because of this. Because essentially at this point, there's an agreement which we call the Founders Agreement, which is standard and supposed to encapsulate all of these things I've mentioned. But a lot of founders just work on trust and say, I know him, he's my friend from college, he's my friend from school, and then they never put in this contract. In 2019, we invested in a company, a female founder company, I remember, in Nigeria. And the founders, great founders, they had been friends. And they came to us and we said, okay, fine, this is your founders agreement. Let us walk through this agreement and agree on what equity each person gets. What do they do? If you leave before 6 months, what's the cliff period? What do you lose? And we walked through all of this. And the idea was for them to sign it. Unfortunately, they did not end up signing it. And we did not know. Fast forward 6 months later, one of them decided they were going to jackpot to Canada and did not even inform the other party. So December comes, we hear the CEO is going to Canada. So, okay, the question then becomes, okay, fine, let's get the COO to become the CEO and going to run the company. but let's go back to the founders agreement and reduce the holdings of the CEO so that the others are sufficiently incentivized to run the company. Well, the CEO refuses to leave a part of our equity. And unfortunately, because they never signed the founders agreement, it did not become law. And so there was nothing you could do. The company ended up failing, not because the business was not needed, but because they failed to do a very fundamental thing, right? Signing the founders agreement. So if you're still a founder, and at that stage, I think I need to reiterate that you need to have a valid signed founders agreement that defines all of this. Equity stake, cliff, what happens when someone leaves, how does equity vest over how many years? And all of those things are quite important that need to be specified. And so then that takes you to the next stage. Now, so you've now finished with the ideation stage, you're moving to what we know as the MVP stage. You're looking for what's the most valuable, you're looking for your MVP, right? You're saying, I've been trying all these ideas. What's the most viable product I have right now? What's the minimally viable product I have that the market needs today? So you're now testing the market, you're testing the business model, right? You probably formalize the company, register with CAC. You also probably raise your initial capital from angel investors or even family friends and fools, right? And so at this point in time, what is the governance focus, right? This is when you start looking at what your cap table, right? For instance, and which is what connects you and the investors. You start looking at your shareholders agreement, right? What are you committing to? What are your shareholders committing to? What rights do they have over you? What equity do they get, right? You start looking at all of those things at that point in time. You start bringing in employees, and you start asking yourself, for your employees, are you giving them equity? Is it vesting over time? What are the guidelines that guide employee behavior, right? Harassment issues. So again, these things are very fundamental. The sad thing is a lot of companies don't put this in very early on until they're raising substantial capital, by which time the company culture has built in and governance has not been embedded, and you start seeing issues come up, right? This is when you start putting internal controls around even financial expenditure. Who can approve what amount of money, right? So it's not because you are the CEO, can you just write a personal check or transfer company money into your own account because you are saying you can find, I don't have to report to a board. Because at this point, most people don't have boards. But the issue is it's key for you at this point to actually have these internal controls to have that guides financial expenditure, that guides employee behavior, right? The structure, right? How do you make decisions at this point in time so that as you go further on to growth, as you go further on to scale, this is already built in and you can only just build on them. So once you've left the MVP stage, and I'm cutting this very short because of time, right? You then go to the PMF, the product market fit stage, where you're actually dealing with the market itself. You formalize your company, it's operational now, you receive your investment. Again, the company is already been validated by the market, right? And business model is usually changing at this point, right? So again, at this point, you are tweaking different business models to actually find what works. And this at this point in time, you start thinking of your board, right? You start thinking of, I'm going towards Series A fundraise. I'm bringing institutional investors in. What kind of board do I want, right? What needs do I have from a board? And what's the relationship between the board and the founders, right? And you start looking into regular meetings with your board. Start looking to employee considerations from issues around insurance, issues around employee needs. All those things start getting defined properly. Communication and all the other things that affect proper business. Because the issue is this: if you don't tie this up, what usually happens is it delays your major fund round. When you see a lot of companies go to raise fund A and it's delayed across 6 months, 9 months, 10 months, 12 months, a lot of times it's not even about the business not being ready in terms of the market or the product. It's because governance is missing, processes are missing, and you can't even find data rooms, you can't find documents. Start asking founders, where are the agreements signed with your employee agreements, and you realize you don't have employee agreements. Where are the founders agreements? You can't find it. Where are the shareholder agreements? Where are the agreements with your vendors, with your customers, with your clients? Where is your ESOP, right? You start seeing where are your legal agreements, where are your bank statements. So all those things are missing. People are just focused on just raising money and just building business. And so all of that slows down, or sometimes it even scares away from investors, which is why it's quite key that even before you get to this stage, you have built all of these governance components in there. Otherwise, they come to bite you, right? You're the CEO, but does that mean you can harass your employees? How do you treat your employees? If there's a conflict between the CEO, between the founders and the employees, where does it go to? How does it get resolved? Sexual harassment issues, how does it get resolved? Financial mismanagement issues, who does it go to, right? All those things have to be defined. They're not defined beyond this stage. It complicates the fundraise you have to do when you bring in institutional investors. So let's quickly move on to the growth stage. By the growth stage, it's assumed, you're not established, you found a product market fit, just about scaling and raising capital, right? Your product is already validated. And at this point, really, it should be about consolidating governance practices. As you scale beyond countries, beyond markets, what are the new things you need to add? Compliance, right? So at this point, compliance should be a part of the business, and most companies at this point should even have a compliance officer. Should have someone who's looking over governance. The sad thing is the number of companies you find in the growth stage that have not even thought of these things. And you'll be surprised, how do you go all the way from ideation to growth stage? Because at this point, if you have not embedded governance in your processes, it will show. You might escape it in the first 3 stages, but if you have a growth stage company, it will show, because at this point, you have employees spread across. And if you not be the culture of governance, if you not be processes, standard process to guide that, it will show by the time investors are dealing with you, partners are dealing with you, by the time you're hiring employees. And a lot of times it's just a death knell for the company, right? Because you've not built in governance into the process up to this point. I will see several examples of that, where you now start dealing with all of those issues, and it affects the image of the company, it affects the image of the sector, right? Of the startup sector and things like that. Next slide. Yeah. So I want to conclude again for time. And the key thing I think we should take away from this, it's when we're talking about governance, right? In Nigeria, you also have the NGGC, and that's something we probably will discuss. How does the NGGC code, how does it apply to startups, right? But beyond CAMA, beyond CAC, I think there is some fundamental principles that we as investors always look for when we're investing. Transparency, right? Fairness, accountability, corporate responsibility. And those things have to be built in from day one into the culture of your startup. Otherwise, you can't fake it at the growth stage when it's too late. And so it's quite important that as a startup founder, from day one, as you're thinking of fundraising, you're thinking of the market, of hiring of talent, you actually embed governance into your principles such that you then take the appropriate level of governance at each stage. And then by the time you get to your growth stage, it's easy for you to attract funding. It's easy for you to attract the right kind of employees because you build a culture. It's also easy for you to quickly identify issues when they come up, and you would have established processes to deal with them. And that's where your board then comes in at the growth stage, right? Or even before that, to help you manage all of that. But unless you have that embedded from day one, it just makes it difficult and difficult as you go forward. And even if you fundraise, even if the market likes you, what would eventually happen is that you would not reach optimal value for the startup because you have not built in governance. So I think I will stop at that point, and then we can take the rest during Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bello. Emma, where are you?
Thank you very much, Mr. Bello, for your presentation.
Bello.
To speak the current.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Bello. We apologize for that break. Thank you very much, sir, for your presentation, leading us through the governance practices that are expected across all the stages of a startup. And we're definitely looking forward to engaging you more on this topic during the discussion segment and the Q&A. So right now, we'll be welcoming the second discussant, Ms. Yemi Keri, who would be speaking on corporate governance in startups, paving the way for business sustainability. So she's going to lead us through the importance of corporate governance for startups and how startups can implement some of these corporate governance structures to drive sustainability. So thank you very much, Ms. Yemi Keri.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you for having me here. You're going to see some similarities between, a lot of similarities between myself and that of Idris, because we are really pretty much talking about the same thing, which is corporate governance, and we're focusing on startups. We're talking here on my area is how you're going to pave the way for business sustainability. I am an investor. I am the co-founder for Rising Tide Africa. It's a group of female angel investors. And what we do is we have our own investment philosophies where we invest in startups. We prioritize female angel, female entrepreneurs, women owned or women led. That does not mean that we do not invest in some male founded ventures. So I'm going to speaking from the perspective of what we look at for startups. And pretty much when we talk to startups about governance, the first thing that comes to their mind is, I can't afford a board. I don't need a board now. Maybe I'll just, so one of the things you would have learned from Idris's slide is not about boards at all. When you're talking about corporate governance, it is those procedures and practices that you put in place for you to be able to conduct your business in a proper manner. And bear in mind that it's a lot of your stakeholders are the ones that are going to be, pretty much looking at your, are going to be benefiting from your company. Your company's business, your stakeholders, that means your customers, your employees, your investors, your mentors, all of those people are your stakeholders, and they want to be able to benefit from your business. And so all of these procedures and practices have to do with them and all of the extended stakeholders who can be governments, which we talk about regulatory, and then also, even your competitors. When they say I'm competing with the likes of Flutterwave, you're already looking at, so when you come to an investor with that kind of statement, we're already thinking that, okay, so this is another Flutterwave, let's see what they have. But if you're competing with them, it is not only about the product, you should be competing also with their brand. And part of what makes up a founder's brand is their corporate governance. So, we here the last slide of Idris talked about transparency, fairness, accountability, and corporate responsibility. These are the fundamental, basic principles of corporate governance. And so let me go directly to what a lot of our founders ask. When should we start thinking about corporate governance? I would say from the beginning of when you start your business, you start talking about corporate governance. Why is this so? Because a lot, when you start to have the idea in your ideation stage, it is only you and it's only in your mind, right? But when you now say, okay, I need to build a platform, and you are not a technical person, you're going to have to call somebody else, whether it's your best friend, your roommate, your cousin, your brother, somebody, to bring their own skill sets to you. And once they are bringing their own skill sets to you, that means that you are entering into a sort of relationship with that person. Whether the person is now called your co-founder, or whether the person is called your partner, you have to be able to, at that point, even before you have your MVP, start to say, okay, I don't have money. But since I don't have money, what I'll be getting from you, I would be giving you in return for you creating this idea of mine is your sweat equity. So let's convert it to equity. You understand? And then the other thing can be, okay, how much investment shares are you going to give me in the company if I build this platform for you? At that point also, you have to be able to start thinking, okay, he's building it for me. Who owns the platform? So there are so many things that you have to start thinking about even before you start your MVP. So when founders ask me, when should I start thinking about corporate governance? It is now. The instant you decide that you want to create a company or a business or a startup is when you should start thinking about that. Because the importance is about you, the sustainability of the business, about the critical foundation of the agreements you are going to lay, the regulatory compliance. So when you start, are you going to be a limited liability company? Are you going to register with CAC for your, all of those things are part of what lays down your corporate governance. So it takes a gradual process, but it becomes more mature and more sophisticated as you move through the various stages of your business. So we say each growth stage, each stage of the growth process represents a favorable moment for adoption and improvement in all of what you have already built on in your corporate governance. So let's look at it, the how. The how, the governance requires, if you look at it in dimensions in 4 areas. So just say to yourself, when I'm looking at corporate governance, I'll look at these 4 pillars: strategy and partnerships and resources, your IP and technology. Even if you do not run on technology, you leverage on technology. Otherwise, we tell you that, if you are not ready to compete, if you are not leveraging on technology to run your business. And then, of course, your process and accountability. If you look at all of these elements, when Idris talked about internal controls, your internal controls is under the pillar of your process and your accountability. And if you're looking at that, then you're saying, at which stage am I in? And what are the different fundamental processes of accountability I need to put in place in this process? So for each different level or stage you're in, you have to check what you have to do. So your founder, so I talked about when you call your brother or your cousin or your roommates to become your technical partner. At that point in time, you should be looking at your founder's agreement. Your founder's agreement is what scales up next one when you now have your company documentation and you say, okay, based on this, as founders, we have agreed that you will get sweat equity, or this is the amount of shares and everything. Therefore, we are incorporating this company. When you incorporate the company, which is the next step, you would then have them as one of your shareholders or one of your directors. So you can see that this thing gradually builds. And then when you get up into the scale-up stage, you're going to then be looking at who are my other directors? Because at the scale-up stage, you probably have a board, right? And if you have a board, you then have to have some of the directors or one or two of the directors in your CAC. So it is from the beginning ab initio. So you have to dimension your business right now as a startup. So how many employees do you have? If you're only 2 or 3, please don't just say that I see now that startups have a one-pager as an employee document, your employee letter, letter of engagement. And to me, it is not only when you get into problems with that employee that you think, it's the best thing that has happened to you right now. You can start to do the work and everything. I see all of that. It is not only when you get into problem with them that you realize that your one-pager is not sufficient. It is important that you articulate the terms and conditions of any, even if the person is coming to help you do ABC for 3 months. Articulate what it is that is going to guide your relationship with that employee, even as you're the startup. And one of the critical things that you need to also understand of importance of lawyers. I know a lot of startup sellers that they cannot afford lawyers. But even if it's just a friend, let them review any agreements you want to pen your hands on. It is important because they have the eyes, they understand the facts that they will be talking about if the shit hits the fan, excuse my language. So, they understand the facts that they will be looking for, the lines in between all of those agreements. Have a third eye, a legal opinion, a legal eye look at it. Don't compromise because you have lack of funds to engage a lawyer. Pay whoever it is, you'll find that it is very important. Whether it is your agreements with your customers, whether it's your agreements with the partners, agreements for outsourcing, whatever it is to someone, all of those things you need to use the legal eye to look at it. It is very important because a lot of businesses now, 2 years down the line after you've started, or 3 years down the line as a business, you begin to see one person needs to leave. The co-founder needs to leave, and then who owns the intellectual property? These are issues that will continue to come up. So you need to continue to make sure that you're looking at all of those things. So we've seen common mistakes. Starting on time is one. Not using your boards the way you're supposed to use your boards and engage them. Dissociating you need to be able to dissociate your CEO from the boardroom. I'll talk a little bit. Let me just run through a little bit about selecting your boards, which is very important, which you will get to. Whether they're advisory board or a major board, make sure that they have competencies and backgrounds that are diverse, so that they are getting information from different perspectives. Make sure that they align with your company interests. Make sure that you keep an odd number because of voting at the end. Make sure that whoever is the chairman is somebody that is, the selection is very important because the board runs the way the person would run it. These are critical, your frequencies of the board. I believe we'll talk a bit more about that. I'm rushing because I think I have 1 or 2 more minutes. But let's look at the resistance of founders to setting up boards, the issue of speed. So you find that I don't need anybody to hold me. This idea, I must be able to quickly put it out there, and I don't want rules and regulations to Sorry, I went up there. So by now, you know that it is not the boards alone that is the major important thing, but that all of the other components and pillars that form out the corporate governance are as important. But when the board comes and they see the kind of structure you have on ground, it encourages any investor, any stakeholders, any shareholders to stand by your business and build on your brand. And it also enables you to increase your brand's visibility. Thank you. I think that's my time is up.
Thank you very much. I hope you can just to confirm. Mrs. Tommy, are you ready? Your mic is muted. Thank you so much for this session. We'll now go over to the interactive session. We would like to advise that if you have any question, please, you can use the chat box and we'll respond to your questions. So Ms. Tommy, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you ever so much for being here today. And a big thank you also to SCGN for organizing a session like this, where we're having two really fantastic speakers with a lot of experience with startups, especially, and corporate governance, where they've come here to share their knowledge and their experience with everyone here. So this is really great, and just to thank SCGN for that, and also Ms. Keri and Mr. Bello also for very insightful discussions. I must say I'm not easily impressed, but I was very impressed with what they had to say. Idris has invested in over 200 startups. I mean, that speaks for something. He probably would have learned a lot, both good and bad. And what he's presented to us today will definitely come from that. In particular, I like the part where he said, when you want to start and you're looking at corporate governance, you start with an idea. And more often than not, when we start with ideas, it's just a little idea. We don't know how it's going to grow. We don't know what's going to happen, you know. We just think maybe it's even a hobby. We really don't know. And the people we bring in at that point in time, or we discuss with, if we don't have clarity, just like he said, and Ms. Keri has also said the same also, if we don't have clarity of different rules, people have different ideas. We all heard this saying before, that success has many fathers. And same thing with startups also. Once the startup is being successful, like, well, yes, he came to me for advice. He even alluded that I will have a percentage. Then you begin to have little issues here and there. The one thing I do want to add to that is that even where you put your structures in place and you have the founders agreement and things like that, please, as a startup entity, take time to read your documents, because there are cases where people have actually put their documents in place and they haven't really read it. They just put, signed on, and then found out later on when there's a bit of a rift, or when one partner has to pull out, or someone wants to get more equity, they find out that they didn't really read their documents. So apart from just having your governance in place, make sure that you spend the time reading it, or just like Yemi said, ensure that you get the services of a lawyer. I've spoken to many lawyers in the past, and they do say that one issue they have is that people don't want to pay for their services. They're so important, and I'm sure there must be ways in which you can get their services in a manner that's not too expensive. But if you don't take advantage of that, then later on you find out that what you'll be spending or what you'll be losing could be a lot more than what you would have been paying for the services of a good lawyer. So that's been very insightful. I like the part that you need to incorporate the appropriate level of governance from day one, within your startup. So don't wait until it's too late. But what happens if you've, if at the beginning, you missed out and you haven't done your corporate governance, because like we know, there are many startups that we have locally in Nigeria here that probably haven't really paid much attention to the governance when they were starting up. So is there any way in which, they can close that gap? And this question is to Mr. Bello. Is there any way in which they can close that gap where they, as a startup, you've missed out on the initial activities that you needed to do, and probably you are at the latter stage?
Yeah, okay, so there's always a way to, a time to remedy things, right? Hopefully you've not gone too far, you're not already at Series B and Co. I don't think you even get there before you get found out. But a lot of times when founders are raising at Series A, that's when we see a lot of these documents are missing, right? You ask them to put a data room together, you can't find those agreements. And so sometimes you have to actually then enforce that before you invest and say, fine, we'll bring in our lawyers or your lawyers and ensure these agreements exist, they are signed. You put in this process, do you have employee guidelines, right? What guides interactions? What guides financial procedures, right? And so it just makes it more cumbersome, right? Because you already have existing processes, you didn't have to change and things like that. But can always be, at least in most instances, it can be remedied. I've seen a few instances in which we have to back out and say, you know what, again, this is just too complicated, right? And also when the founders are not in agreement, when someone has a view of, okay, I was promised X, Y, Z, and someone has a different agreement, different understanding, I can't put it together. But a lot of times, I think, when you're still in the C stage, going to Series A, you can fix that. And even as a good company, you won't always have 100% on your governance. So even public companies in Nigeria, I sit on a couple of boards of public companies in Nigeria, right? And you see that again, you still have, okay, when the NGGC came out, you have to say, fine, we need to fix this part. You need to add independent directors to your board. You need to do X, Y, Z. So you can always get better. So I don't think you ever reach perfection. I think it's just the openness. And then going to folks who actually have the experience, right? And as someone was talking about the lawyers earlier, it's not just about using a lawyer. Using the right lawyer matters. We've seen lawyers screw up agreements, and we asked, wait, who created this agreement for you guys? I have my old school friend, right? Who has no clue about startups, right? And we're just taking something from elsewhere and just applied it here. So again, and so a lot of times you have to then clean all of that up. So in so many years, you can fix those things most of the time.
Okay, thank you very much. Yemi, I'd like to pose this question to you, because as Idris was speaking, I was thinking about one of the things you mentioned. Normally when you're thinking of your startup and then someone comes along with this idea of corporate governance, even if you even knew about it, you're just overwhelmed by the thought of all that you need to do and the cost, because I can imagine that at times like that, money is not readily available. So any advice on what they can do, especially where money is in short supply and the critical activities within corporate governance that they have to put in place? They need the services of a good HR person, legal, just like Idris mentioned, and a few others. IT, for instance, like you said, either they're dependent on IT or they need IT as an enabler. So any advice from yourself?
Why you repeat that? Why you repeat that? How do you go to the house? Why you don't come down again?
There are a lot of companies, right, that offer. So I know of companies that offer some of their services because their corporate responsibility is to help develop and improve the status of startups in the country. So there are legal firms that provide these services, and they provide it for free. They even up to I think KPMG or PwC, one of them actually has an SME desk that you can go to, and they will provide you all of these services. So people in the ecosystem are very much aware that the startups cannot afford professional services at the rate at which they need to earn it, to engage. And so they are beginning to create some of the legal does pro bono for startups. I think there's a company called Pablo and Co. They do accounting services for startups. So you have to ensure that you speak to your peers. You have to ensure that you understand what is going on in your ecosystem, for you to be able to leverage on all of these things. So that is one of the ways that they're doing it. I also know that the Enterprise Development Center, EDC, for Lagos Business School, also provides some of the support structures for startups for them to grow. So you really need to be within the ecosystem and understand where to get all of this from.
Thank you very much.
The other thing I can say is that, some startups, sort of put in they put in their advisory board or their mentors. They select them because they have certain services that they can provide. So in terms of strategy, for instance, so if you're selecting your advisor, instead of you to go to a company that would tell you about the strategy and the roadmap or your go-to-market, you can have an advisor or a mentor that already has this is the subject matter expert within this area, and who has your interest and their own philosophy also aligned. Sometimes also they get accountants or somebody with a financial background that has a firm for who will then say, because he's mentoring you or he's providing advisory to you, that their businesses will do it. So startups use a lot of different methods to get these services.
Thank you very much. And that's quite insightful, actually. So selecting your advisory board with care to help you with some of the services that you require. Just like we see on, what's that program called now? The Den. I'm trying to remember the name of the Den program, where they get people to fund them. Sorry? Dragons Den. Devil's
Well, we
Den
have our own in Nigeria.
Yes.
We have our lions in Nigeria now.
And
that's you guys are watching well. those programs.
Yes, and you see the strategy that some of the people that come to seek more funds, you see their strategy in choosing the dragon or the lion that's going to work with them based on the skills that they have that will help them move forward. Okay. This question is to Idris. You spoke about the role of the regulator in Nigeria, and I just want you to expatiate on that a bit more in terms of what can they do to be more effective? Are they effective? And what can they do to be more effective and to help startups? Just, something that you can say in that area.
So you're putting me on the spot by asking me if the regulators are effective. My answer is they can be more effective.
I like your response.
So I think the idea is this. I think most people look at regulators in Nigeria from a perspective of punitive actions. And that needs to change, right? The regulator is not there just to punish, but to guide and to improve the processes for the whole ecosystem, right? For the corporate governance. And I think a lot of times the regulators themselves need to be educated, right? If there's something that we as investors can do better, I think it's spending more time with the regulators so that they understand the sector better. Because a lot of times, what usually happens is fintechs just see a new rule from the CBN or from BOFIA or from somewhere, and it's all punitive. And they're wondering, I've been spending the last 3-6 months trying to get this license, trying to do X, Y, Z, and next thing I know, they're slamming me with this thing, right? So definitely there's a role there for regulators to kick out tricksters and make the place sane and improve governance. But I think it's key that it's done hand in hand with founders, with the ecosystem, with all the stakeholders, so that it's all for the betterment of the ecosystem and not seen as just people who are punitive. Because what then happens is people would then do things in secret, right? Instead of being open, right? Because they just don't want the regulator to know what they're doing. And that creates even more harm for the ecosystem. So I think there needs to be more interaction between the between the regulator and the founder beyond just one-sided directions and directives. I think that's something that really needs to improve. But definitely there's a role for the regulator. The other thing is this. I think for founders, a lot of times, or for startups, they don't think of themselves as being under the regulator. They think that's for the bigger banks and bigger institutions. And we're still small. And sometimes you get away with something because you're small. But once you become big, or you make your next funding announcement on TechCrunch, and then I think apparently maybe there's someone in the central bank or in one regulator office that says, okay, now we need to go after that guy, right? And then you start having all these interactions that are sometimes not adding value. So, but definitely, I think there needs to be more interaction, positive interaction between the regulators and the startups.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that's something that probably SCGN wants to think about and pay attention to, because there's probably a role for you there also in bringing the parties together so that we can have a more collaborative relationship in developing, in supporting the startups and also helping them to comply with the required regulation. Okay, very soon we'll go into the general question and answer. I can see there are a number of questions and statements coming up. But before we do that, let me just ask Ms. Keri another question. I know you said boards is just one part of corporate governance, and there's a whole lot more than that. But where you have a board, when is the right time to evaluate the board, and what's the frequency?
Right time to do what?
To evaluate the board, and then the frequency also.
So you know, there's a certain pattern that occurs in your growth stage. First of all, you have mentors, then after some consultants, then you have advisory board, and then you then set up a board, right? A board is when you really are then looking at those serious funds that you want, and you have your product market fits already. The key thing in selecting the board is it's essential that you have different perspectives. And in having different perspectives, you don't want to have what we call groupthink. That is when maybe out of the 5 people in your board, 3 of them are bodies, and the 3 of them, are going to go out together and everything. So whatever they're going to discuss in the board is already, decided, and they have their own opinion. So they're not looking at other people's perspectives, and then come to the board and the votes are carried. So it is important that you look at people often have finance, legal, they have strategy, they have brand, then they have the subject matter experts within their board. That is really pretty much what it is, and it's from different stratas. Whether you are you're very, very experienced, so it varies different, and then you can have whether you're independent or non-independent. The other key thing is that a lot of common mistakes that people make is that they want to have all of the founders on the board, and then when the other independent board members are speaking, they are coming from a view of protection of their businesses, and not seeing what the board is saying. So they become very defensive. So it is important that it's not everybody that is a co-founder or founder that have to be on the board. It's really the management, the person that is leading the management team that should be. And when the person is, when a CEO and you're on a board, you need to be able to separate that management and a board role, because once those decisions are being conflicting, there's a conflict of interest in your mind, and you're not able to take informed decisions. The other thing is that typically we say the board's frequency should be about 4 times a year. So one meeting per quarter. That is the standard. Some people have 3, and then some have additional meetings and executive meetings, emergency meetings, depending on what issues are. It is important to also have committees so that your board meetings don't just take the longest time. So your board committee will consist of a group of people that would look at the issues in a certain vertical. So maybe finance committee, or you're looking at your audit committee. So they would already have the time to drill down with that, and then they report back to the board with their committee reports. So these are different things that are important and that should be looked at in the composition of the board.
All right, thank you very much. Idris, do you have anything else to add to that before we then move into the questions coming in?
You're muted.
You're mute.
You're muted.
Yeah, okay. So I think one that I think is increasingly important for African startups is that even as they grow big, it's important to retain someone on the board who has a knowledge of the local ecosystem. Because what we've seen is this. So initial investors in African startup are sometimes, angels, so just take a Nigerian startup, for instance. You will have Nigerian investors and maybe they're on the board. Now, increasingly as they grow bigger, the company grows bigger, you then see bigger investors come, strong investors come in. And a lot of times the initial board observer or board member drops off because he's not doing follow-on rounds, right? Now, you could have a stage where the entire board is then full of the latest investors, right, who are big institutions and who are increasingly not even Africans, right? And that is a danger in 2 perspectives. One, you lose sight of the local ecosystem, right? And some of the insights you could gain, the board could gain from that. Secondly is you could have a situation where the board members are then just thinking from a monetary or from a value perspective alone, and not thinking about this, about the social issues, about local issues, and the impact of that company on the local ecosystem. So I think, again, maybe it's on the part of having independent board observers or stuff. I think even as a company outgrows its initial investors, for African startups, it's important that we retain someone on the board who can speak to the local ecosystem.
Okay, thank you very much. And I like that last part where you spoke about having people on the board or investors, which then links to the organization that are focusing only on profit. And obviously that's very important and that's critical, But I guess that's part of where the corporate governance comes in also, because to be, you need to think about the environment, you need to think about the social part also, and you really want that organization to be right with their corporate governance in those kind of areas, especially depending on which kind of industry you're in. So for instance, if you talk about the oil and gas industry, for instance, environment is very important. And if you don't do things right, it can impact your license to operate, and therefore impact your continuity, your business continuity, and therefore your profitability. Okay. Emma, how do you want us to handle the questions? I think I can see a few questions on the chat. This one is so I'll take some from the chat, and then we can then see if people are putting their hands up and also want to ask questions directly. But this one is from Titilayo Ajayi, and she says, my question is to Mrs. Yemi Keri. Is the idea that insisting on corporate governance, that it can slow down decision-making true? Okay.
I think I attempted to answer that. I don't think it is true. It only makes you more organized in your decision making. So, if you're guided, if you're properly guided, you make better informed decisions. Whereas if you're scuffling for information, then your decision making would therefore be skewed. So it's putting things in the proper perspective. Your processes, it's like you articulating your values on each item of your operation. If you look at it like that, and you'll be able to know that the issue of governance doesn't, it enables you to see clearer. It doesn't slow it down at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just to add to that, I think it's the same thing when you tell founders you need to send regular reports, investor reports, and they think it distracts them from their work. Well, then something you're doing wrong. If you can't create enough time to actually send your investors reports, then you're doing something wrong. All right, so you have to create time for it, for governance. It's part of it.
So true. You just have to create that time. And initially, it might seem like an uphill task, but once you get it going and you start, then it becomes a lot easier. And you will also begin to see the benefit of doing that. So this from Israel Ekundayo. I started my poultry farm business about 3 years ago with neither a business plan nor a concrete principle of corporate governance. But I have just incorporated it with CSC since about 4 months ago. My question is that, do I cut out every other things about the informal period of business and only present my business when I started, keeping its documentation and incorporation to investors? Thank you so much. I think this is a question that many people will want to hear the answer to. And this one will go to Idris. So the person started their business. 4 years down the line, they just finally formalized it with CSC. What do they do with their record?
I think it's okay to share again. And I said in the very beginning that sometimes in ideation, you're not even sure that the company is going to, or the idea is going to become a company. So sometimes you don't even formalize on time, right? But at some point you start to formalize, and so we've seen that, right? So and even sometimes you register in Nigeria and then you demo to Delaware, right? I think seeing the history helps, right? Because you've been established for 4 years and just start this year. I come to meet me, I don't show the initial 4 years, and I just see that you have $1 million in revenue. How did you get to that, right? So I think you've been transparent. Again, go back to the principles. All the principles of governance is transparency, right? Be transparent and show it. This is how we operated, and then we formalized, and this is what's left. This is what we are here to do, right? So it also shows that it shows growth, right? That at some point you were not aware enough, and now you are aware and you're taking the right steps. So I would opt for being transparent in that, rather than just showing just the small period you've been formalized.
Thank you. So transparency.
If I may add, yes. Yes, if you look at it like, okay, everything you did before you formalize is also part of the history of your business. So you're not just going to cut off that and then jettison it. So you need to be able to pull all of that in and articulate it in one form or the other when you are, implementing the corporate governance. So it's very important that you do that at all times.
Okay, thank you very, very much. So I hope that's answered your question, Israel Ekondaya. Another question on the chat says, I thank you for this session. As an attorney and a startup advisor, I see so many gaps as far as startup compliance is concerned. How would you rectify a situation where you see a startup at a pre-evaluation stage already having a board who have also invested financially in the company and are shareholders as well? How do you balance interest between the CEO and the board in this instance, especially where the CEO is a non-financial contributor?
I'll leave that to Yemi.
Yemi, are you good? Yemi, are you good with that? So let's understand the question first.
Okay, let me say. So what they're saying is that you have a startup in pre-valuation, so they haven't started the valuation and everything, and then they have a board, right? And part of the board. So when I'm investing, I say I want to have a board seat. So I have a board seat, right? So part of I'm on the board of the company, and I'm also a shareholder. So I have shares, and I'm still on the board. And then the issues now starts on the board on valuation. So chances that I'm biased because I want a higher valuation so that as an investor I can cash out properly, or the business, and this happens a lot, right? So one of the things is and they're now talking about a CEO on the board that does not have any financial contribution. Now, I would say, how do you handle that? The CEO should align with whoever has the financial knowledge. And in terms of valuation, you need to discuss very well on what the valuation of the company is, and not build it based on favoring those on your board. You know why? Now people are beginning to bring down their valuations. All those hype that I'm going $2 million is coming down. They realize that now that they have to now raise another round, they're beginning to see that people are looking at, okay, you are coming to me at 15 million. What is the basis of this? And so they're now saying they are discounting their valuation so that you can invest and come on in this round, so that when the valuation goes up, you can then cash out. It's now telling in the market. So for the CEO has to be very, what are the methods in which they're doing the valuation? And everything you do as a board should be in the best interest of the company and not the best interest of whoever's on the board. The difference between advisory board and a main board is the fiduciary responsibility. And if anything goes on in that company, the regulators and the EFs are coming for the board members. And if you're on that board, you must understand why things are going on the way they do. So it is important that everything is set out in the best interest of the company. So I think, I don't know if I've really answered, but that's the.
So let me put some color on that, because I've seen a couple of that. So what usually happens is when you see an SME transitioning into a startup. So I start a business or a farm or whatever it is, and I get 100,000 naira from my uncle. So I give him 10%. I get 20,000 naira from my friend. I give him 5%. I have a girlfriend. I give her 50%. And it all adds up 100%. A year in, 2 years in, I earn everybody raising money for startups at the valuation of $5 million. So I decide I want to, and I put them on the board. I name them directors. We go to CAC. We give them all that stuff. And I then decide, you know what? I want to turn this to a startup at 5 million valuation. And that's when people now run into this problem. Well, it's coming to raise money at 5 million valuation. We're already giving out about 80% of the company out. And she's trying to raise a bigger valuation for a smaller amount. And they now want to issues of a lot of the folks who are even directors are misaligned, right? With where the company should go. And so what we usually tell them is that, go start something new, or find a way of packaging everything under 20% or stop, right? Because again, as a founder, if you do not have enough ownership yourself, even before you're raising money, it reduces your incentives to actually stay with the company for a long time, right? And so usually we say by rule of thumb, we're entering a Series A with less than 30%, less than 40, 50%, there's more likelihood that you won't stay long with the company, so you won't be able to raise funding. And so when you come to be a seed founder and you only own 10% or 20%, because your uncle and your friends already own the rest, and you're not asking for this huge valuation, it's already a red flag. And so you sometimes have to go fix, and I've seen a lot of this. You go back and talk to your uncle, right? And fix that issue before you come talk to investors about valuation and things like that. And then all these people thinking they're already on the board, so they have to continue being on the board. You're not adding value to the board. If they're not aligned with the direction that the company is going to go, then we don't want them on the board. And something you might have to go and fix at the family meeting before you come talk to investors.
Thank you very much. It just goes to show that we have to put a lot of careful thoughts into this, especially when you're starting up, so that you also don't burn bridges and create issues within your social ecosystem, really. Now, let me see, do we have any participants who want to ask questions? If they can just raise their hands and signify. I think we still have a few more minutes before the end. Is anyone raising their hand? One question has come in, but I want to see if anyone has raised their hand. I want to ask questions. No one wants to speak to us directly?
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you very much for this very, very enlightening session. I was the one that asked the question earlier, so I just thought to just audibly just appreciate the answers I received. And I'm asking this because it's a challenge we have where, you know, just like what Mr. Idris has said, when you have companies that are trying to transition from SMEs and then they're trying to, you know, really be structured, they've already distributed the shares amongst themselves, giving board positions without understanding the fundamentals of what the relationship should be between board members, shareholders, and all that. And it's kind of like an issue. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for this perspective. Just to be clear and just to ask just something as a follow-up. At the point where you have this challenge and this conflict of interest, there was something Mr. Idris said, which I didn't quite catch. Did you say that they have to go back and decide what their relationship should be, or what would be the best way to sort out those conflicts of interest? I just thought to ask that follow-up question. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a practical example. So there was this company, I think it's in the HR tech space, and it was just doing that on a side thing, right? And so when he needed some funding, his uncle gave him the money. When he had an office, a friend gave him a space to use. And what he was just doing was just giving them equity, right? He was didn't put any valuation on it. It was like, you're going to be profit sharing. And they made them directors. Now he's found out it could be a startup and wanted to transform it. And they came in and said, okay, I'm trying to raise money for about 10% equity. And we looked at it and said, this is not going to fly. You have all these directors. Your uncle is not adding any value. It's great. It's your uncle, right? It's helpful to you. So you have to go back and decide what you want to be, right? And what then ended up happening was they all agreed, okay, for the kind of valuation was trying to raise and the value that was raised for, every initial equity was then summarized up to 20% equity. So basically, you took 100% back to 20%, like you took 1/5 of that, right? That then created enough equity for the founder and the new people to come in, right? And then what they then also did was have one person who felt added value represent all the existing investors on the board, right? And they could now then bring in other mission-aligned investors, right? And that was the way we handled that, right? Rather than just bringing in everybody or throw everybody away, because also you also be careful, right? It made promises to those people, whether out of ignorance or not. So you also have to be sure you're not burning bridges and just not throwing them away, right? And so we have to manage that aspect. So that was the way we managed that. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you very much. It does.
Thank you very much. So my last question to both of you, you're both investors, okay? So what are the things that, you know, you look at as an investor before investing, aside from the viability of the business idea? You know, what are the things that will make you want to invest or decide not to invest in a startup? So let me go with Yemi first, please.
Okay, so the Rising Tide in itself has its own investment philosophy. So we look at different things: female-owned, female-led, gender diverse, technology-enabled, product market fit, and everything. But more importantly is that as an investor, you know you're going into a relationship, whether it's 3 to 5 years or 10 years, right? And I don't invest in people I cannot see myself growing a relationship with. In other words, I invest in the people. So somebody might come and I just know that they have certain of sense of responsibility, passion. So I integrity, you know, and I'm pretty much just even in pitches watching the not what they're selling. What they're selling may be good, but I know that, you know, 2 to 3 years, if you're looking at technology-enabled business, there'll be scalability, there'll be different revenue models. So we can recreate that product or service as down the line as much. Is this the person that can listen to me and say that thing that product or service that you're bringing to me in 6 months time, I tell them, you know, can we do it this way? And the person would listen. So for me personally, the founder is very critical. The team that surrounds the founder is very critical, because in the end, the founder is the one that would really dictate the culture of whatever business it is, you know, and I look at that other than the other thing. So that element of the founder, the trust, the integrity, all those things that surround a founder is what I pretty much am investing in, because really, I don't know whether that product or service can hit it, because we invest in very early stage where we don't even know what this might, maybe this might become a big elephant or it might just die tomorrow. So for me, that is critical. The other thing would be, so if I'm investing in this business, how do I get out? You know, where do I see the exits? And that's that just is smiling, because that is because
Am I the one frozen, or is it?
the ecosystem pretty early, and you know, and we entered into the business pretty early, and now we are getting to the stages where we need to start to look for exits. And so it is now that time that, okay, my money has sat down for 4 years. How do I get out? So right now, as I'm investing, I'm looking at the end goal. So I would leave the remaining to Idris.
You know,
sorry, Idris, before you go, just to say, so that aspect of exits is actually a really huge one. And this is to SCGN. We'll just park that, because that is really, really critical. I know that this session we're having today is the first of a series that they will be having. So talking about the exit strategy, you know, is something that we really need to look at. But because of time, it's not something that we'll be able to do today. So thanks, Yemi, very much for just dropping that in very nicely at the end, you know, but it's really, really important that it's something that is addressed. Please, Idris, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, it's always a pleasure to be on with Yemi on panels, because apart from the amazing opinions and insights she has, what I lack in here, she makes up for it, right? So it's always a good combination, right? So we usually say we're in the people business. When people ask me what business are we in, when we invest in people at the end of the day, right? Ideas come and go, things change, pivot, and it's a long-term relationship, right? And you spend so much time with them, with those founders on my WhatsApp, on calls and stuff like that. You are going out, backing them, vouching for them, putting your neck out, right? And so you always are looking for those red flags. Before we invest, we're saying we're looking at 3 key things. Why you? Why now? How big? We're saying why you? Why should we back you? Right? What's unique about you? What's your differentiator? What's your unfair advantage? But so part of that is also integrity. And it starts to do due diligence in our climb because of lack of data. And so we do a lot of social engineering. So we're asking, so the joke is we're always looking for that angry ex-girlfriend who can spill, right? People you've scammed, right? And things like that. And again, when we say red flag, we believe it, right? Again, because these things we recall. And so that's quite key for us. So the people is quite key for us. And then we then look at how big the business could become. And of course, the timing, right? Timing plays a huge role in success. The ideas before COVID that we don't have scaled, or post-COVID would scale now. And that's quite key for us. And to end on the note that Yemi ended on, exits. I like to say, to invest is human, to exit is divine. Any fool can write a check. The question is, can you get the money back, right? And so the goal is, you know, all these investments we're doing, we get a sizable chunk back. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, guys. I noticed that there are 1 or 2 more questions. I also noticed that there's a hand up. Because of time, I want to hand over back to SCGN for them to do the wrap up, and maybe they can explain how the unanswered questions can be answered at a later date. But just really to say thank you ever so much to Yemi. Thank you ever so much to Idris. I hope you don't mind. I think we've had a good time. It's been very insightful. So I think I can call you guys by your first name. I've gotten to know you quite well on this during this roundtable discussion. For me as a moderator, I have picked up quite a number of tips also, and I'm hopeful and expecting that the other participants in the room, I say in the room, but you know what I mean, have done so too. So thank you ever so much. You've been delightful discussants. You've been insightful and educative also. And now I'd like to hand over back to Emma. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mrs. Etomi, and our wonderful discussants for an insightful and engaging roundtable. We believe that the attendees were, took one or two things away from this session. Thank you so very much for that. Right now, I would like to take a group photograph. So please, if you all could kindly turn on your videos, we will do that very quickly. Thank you. Thank you. Some videos are being turned on right now. Please wait for the rest for some seconds. Thank you so much as you oblige us. Okay, so we're taking the group photograph now. Okay. Okay, all right, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. All right, so as we close this session, we'd like to just make a few announcements. Thank you for staying to the end of this session and for engaging the discussants and asking your questions as well. So in concluding, our annual corporate governance conference will be coming up next week, precisely Tuesday next week. And the theme is digital diversity and inclusion, evolving trends in governance and board culture. That is, another platform where we can engage on this topic of corporate governance, if this is something that interests you and should actually interest you. The flyer will be coming up very soon. So please kindly register. The link will be put in the chat box. I would also send it to you by email as well. So please do feel free to register and attend. We also have an upcoming training. Okay, so before that, there is a feedback form in the chat section. We would like to serve you better. Please kindly fill the feedback form. It won't take up to 3 minutes. Please fill it and let us know your thoughts. Right, so this is our annual corporate governance conference holding next week, Tuesday. Please feel free to register. We also have an upcoming training on cybersecurity governance. If this is something that interests you, or this is your field, or anyone who needs this training, please, you can send your interest to this email address, nejim@corpgovnigeria.org. We'll leave it in the chat box as well. It's an upcoming training on cybersecurity governance. Finally, this is a reminder that the Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria is committed to the development of corporate governance in Nigeria and Africa. And we have an array of services to aid this. Our board evaluation and governance advisory, corporate governance audits, and board policy document development and review. And if you were here at the beginning of the roundtable, we also showcased some of our books on corporate governance. So we are everything corporate governance. If you'd like to get more information about this, please send us an email at info@corpgovnigeria.org. So thank you once again, everyone, for being a part of this roundtable. And please do remember to kindly fill the feedback form. So thank you very much. We would definitely have another series for corporate governance in startups. So please stay tuned. And when that comes out, please Feel free to sign up and invite as many people as possible. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.